Today, I want to talk about RESTful APIs and organizing controllers in Rails. Here I have a pretty simple users controller with a show action, and what that does is if you hit the users slash ID, then you get a JSON representation of the user. Now, sometimes in a website where you have users, you want an API endpoint to search for users. For instance, you may want to search by email. And so that's when you have to start thinking about the architecture of your application. How do you do that? So an example could be, well, how about we also allow emails to be passed here in that param, and then here we have some sort of like case. If it's an email, then we find by email, otherwise we find by ID. You can do that, but it's a little it can be a little confusing for the API users to know what should be passed in that param. Something else you can think is, let's do a different action, right? So for instance, v2 users maybe search, and then you pass it in the body. You pass in the body something like user, email, and then the email. So this works, but it kind of goes against the principle that you should try to follow the RESTful actions as much as possible, which means show, index, new, create, edit, update, and destroy. Here we will be creating a new action that doesn't fit in this paradigm. So what helps me when I have to make these decisions is always to think, what is actually happening when somebody wants to search for this email and then get something. Post as a HTTP verb, it means to create something, right? And so it actually it's given us a hint that we're creating a search. This is what we're really doing. Like here we're getting a user like this, but here we're creating a search. And so when I have to implement these endpoints, normally I think, actually, can we do something like this? Like, can we make it explicit that like this is not super clear. Are we creating a user named search? It's not super clear, but this is very clear. We are creating, because it's a post, what kind of resource? A user search. And then we pass the body. And what that means is that normally the way in which I implement this is simply to create a new controller, and then it's going to be pretty similar to this one, except that it's going to be called, let's call this user searches controller, and then rather than user find, we have user find by email, and we're going to have some sort of user params email, where the user params are params, let's say require user permit email. Okay, so and then in the routes we add that line. So we're not mixing resources. Like this resource right here is the goal is to show users, list the users, create users, and so on. This is just limited to searching. So we're creating a search for that user and so on. And I think it's good because it separates the concerns of the two classes. And so now that we have this, the way in which we can invoke it is we can make a post to v2 user searches, and then in the body we pass user and the email, and this should be called create, because I called that action create. Cool. So because I'm using find by, which raises an exception, and the code base already responds with 404 for exception, we don't have to worry about that. But now if I pass a real email, we get the result back. So this is my typical approach when I have to add a new action. And my first thought is, oh, I can just add an action to an existing controller. If the action is not index, show, new, create, edit, update, or destroy, I think about it a little longer and I think, what is actually the goal of this action? We are creating a user search, right? And it helps model the process, because now if you think about it, maybe we want to store all the searches, maybe we want to have a log about them, and it's important that this is separate from this controller because they basically do two different things. And so that's my advice. Try not to add custom actions to REST controllers if possible, or at least give it a thought and say, can this be its own thing? Because then the code is going to be shorter in every file, and it's going to be very clear if I open this file what this is doing. Oh, it's creating a search, which is finding a user by the AMA.